Good evening. Tonight, we're looking at a story that, if verified, could become one of the most significant civil, military controversies in modern American history. In a stunning and highly unusual development, a group of 38 current and former senior military leaders, including 7 four-star generals, has released a public letter questioning President Donald Trump's conduct as commander-in-chief. The statement was unveiled earlier today at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., and according to reports from several news organizations, it was made public at approximately 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. What makes this moment so extraordinary is not just the content of the letter, but who signed it. These are individuals who built their careers inside an institution that traditionally avoids political confrontation at all costs. American military leaders are trained from day one to respect civilian control of the armed forces. Publicly challenging a sitting president is almost unheard of. Yet today, these officers decided to break with that tradition. The letter cites what the signatories describe as a pattern of actions over the past 14 months that they believe place political interests ahead of national security and military readiness. According to the document, those concerns revolve around 3 specific incidents that the officers claim represent dangerous interference in operational military decisions. The first incident allegedly occurred in October, when an intelligence outpost in the Middle East received a sudden order to withdraw personnel. According to the officers, the decision came without consultation with regional commanders and was issued only hours after a campaign rally in which Trump publicly criticized the deployment. The second situation reportedly happened in January, involving a NATO training exercise. According to the letter, authorization for the joint exercise was delayed after a senior admiral, who had previously testified before Congress about defense budget concerns, was placed under scrutiny by administration officials. But the most serious allegation centers on an order dated February 9th. According to the military leader's account, a directive allegedly instructed the Joint Chiefs of Staff to delay emergency equipment shipments to a forward operating base until certain senior commanders agreed to participate in a White House event promoting the administration's military policies. If accurate, the implication is profound. Operational military support may have been tied to political messaging. Speaking at the press conference, retired Army General Marcus Caldwell, who previously served as vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, delivered the opening remarks. Standing beside him were Admiral Jennifer Hartley, former commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, and retired Marine Corps Lieutenant General Robert Hayes, a veteran of multiple combat theaters. General Caldwell began by emphasizing that the officers involved had served under presidents from both political parties and had historically avoided public criticism of civilian leadership. But, he said, the current situation forced them to speak. "We have devoted our lives to defending the Constitution," Caldwell told reporters. "We have served under leaders of different parties and political philosophies. Yet we cannot remain silent if operational decisions affecting the safety of American service members appear to be influenced by political considerations." The room reportedly fell silent as Caldwell continued. He acknowledged the fundamental principle that the military must remain subordinate to civilian authority. However, he argued that civilian leadership carries its own responsibility to make decisions based on national security rather than personal political gain. "When military operations become tools for political leverage," Caldwell said, "the trust between civilian leaders and the armed forces is broken." The statement sent immediate shockwaves through Washington. Civil, military relations in the United States have historically been governed by strict norms designed to prevent the armed forces from becoming politically involved. That system depends on mutual restraint. Military leaders avoid politics, and civilian leaders avoid politicizing the military. Many analysts say today's letter signals that some senior officers believe those boundaries may be eroding. To understand the significance of this moment, it helps to look back at previous clashes between military leaders and presidents. One of the most famous occurred in 1951, when President Harry Truman dismissed General Douglas MacArthur during the Korean War. MacArthur had publicly criticized the administration's strategy and advocated expanding the conflict into China. Truman removed him to reinforce the principle that military leaders cannot dictate policy. Another example came in 1993, when Chairman of the Joint Chiefs General Colin Powell expressed concerns about the implementation of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy under President Bill Clinton. Powell voiced his reservations through congressional testimony, but ultimately followed the policy once it was enacted. In both cases, disagreements existed, but they were handled within established institutional channels. What makes the current situation different, according to the letter's authors, is the allegation that operational military decisions themselves may have been influenced by political considerations. The officers argue that if commanders feel pressure to demonstrate political loyalty in order to secure operational support for their troops, it undermines the professional independence that military advice depends on. They also claim that the issue has been building quietly for months. Sources familiar with Pentagon discussions say that concerns about the politicization of military leadership have circulated internally for some time. According to those sources, the officers involved debated several options before going public, including private meetings with administration officials and confidential testimony to Congress. Ultimately, they concluded that public disclosure was the only path that would ensure transparency. But the story doesn't end there. Because the February 9th directive mentioned in the letter may be the key piece of evidence behind this extraordinary move, and the details surrounding that directive are now raising even more questions. Let's take a closer look at the directive that appears to be at the center of this controversy. According to the account presented by the military leaders during the press conference, the chain of events began on February 9th at approximately 2:15 p.m. That afternoon, the White House Chief of Staff allegedly contacted officials at the Pentagon with instructions that immediately raised alarm. The message, according to General Caldwell's description, was simple but deeply unusual. The acting Deputy Secretary of Defense was told to pause authorization requests related to 3 forward operating bases overseas. Those bases were reportedly awaiting approval for equipment shipments and logistical support tied to evolving threat assessments in their regions. When the Pentagon official asked for clarification about why the authorizations were being halted, the explanation was reportedly vague, but troubling. The message allegedly indicated that certain commanders needed to show a better understanding of administration priorities before their requests would be approved. 2 hours later, the situation reportedly took an even stranger turn. According to the letter, commanders at the same 3 bases received calls from a White House political advisor. The invitation was for them to participate in a televised roundtable scheduled for February 14th. The event would highlight what the administration described as the strength and readiness of the American military. The invitation itself was not unusual. Administrations often organize events featuring military leadership. But according to the officer's account, the timing created a clear implication. Participation in the public event, they claim, appeared tied to the lifting of the authorization delays. In other words, the message some commanders perceived was this: publicly support the administration's defense narrative, and the operational requests would move forward. Decline, and your authorization delays might continue. The officers who signed the letter argue that even the appearance of such a connection crosses a line that the American military system has always tried to avoid. Because if operational decisions begin to depend on political loyalty, commanders face an impossible dilemma. Do they comply with political requests to ensure their troops receive equipment and support? Or do they refuse and risk slowing down resources that could affect the safety of the personnel under their command? That dilemma is exactly what the letter's authors say forced them to speak out. But this issue did not remain confined to internal military circles. According to several sources, the Senate Armed Services Committee became aware of the directive shortly after it was issued. A copy of the document, reportedly marked classified, was allegedly provided to members of the committee during a closed-door briefing on February 12th. Inside that secure meeting, lawmakers from both parties reportedly reacted with immediate concern. One of the voices mentioned in reports was Senator Michael Thornton, a Republican from Virginia and a former Marine Corps officer. According to accounts from individuals familiar with the meeting, Thornton told colleagues that he had never encountered anything similar during his decades of military and public service. He reportedly warned that ignoring the matter could make lawmakers complicit in a serious breach of constitutional norms. On the Democratic side, Senator Patricia Chin of California, the ranking member of the committee, described the directive as potentially one of the most troubling uses of commander-in-chief authority in modern times, if the allegations were accurate. By the end of that 4-hour session, multiple senators from both parties reportedly agreed that the issue warranted further investigation. Plans were discussed to formally request that the Pentagon's Inspector General launch an inquiry into the directive and the events surrounding it. But before that request could move forward through official channels, the group of military leaders decided to take matters into their own hands. That decision led to today's press conference and the public letter that has now captured national attention. Another important detail adds complexity to the situation. According to individuals familiar with the discussions behind the scenes, the 38 signatories may represent only a portion of those who share these concerns. Several additional flag officers, some of them still on active duty, were reportedly interested in adding their names to the statement. However, military legal advisors cautioned that active duty personnel are bound by strict Department of Defense regulations limiting political activity. Publicly criticizing a sitting president could potentially violate those rules. As a result, many of the officers who supported the letter's message were unable to sign it while still serving. That means the public document largely reflects the voices of retired senior officers, even though the concerns described may extend more widely within the military community. Sources also suggest the group spent months debating how to handle the situation. Options considered included requesting a private meeting with the president, raising concerns through the Secretary of Defense, or presenting classified testimony to Congress. Each option, however, came with limitations. A private meeting could occur without leaving any public record. Working through the Defense Department assumed senior officials would be willing to challenge the White House directly. And classified testimony would keep the issue hidden from the broader public. Ultimately, the officers decided transparency was the only path that could force meaningful accountability. Meanwhile, the story has taken another turn due to the response from the White House. Shortly after the letter became public, former President Trump addressed the situation on Truth Social, his social media platform. In his post, he sharply criticized the signatories, describing them as washed-up generals who, he claimed, were bitter about being passed over for positions and were attempting to undermine his administration. Trump specifically mentioned General Caldwell and Admiral Hartley by name, accusing them of political motivations. However, the response did not directly address the specific allegations about the February 9th directive. That omission has already become a major point of discussion among legal analysts and political commentators. Some argue that if the directive has been misrepresented, the administration could clarify the situation by releasing additional context or documentation. Others caution that classified military directives cannot always be made public without security risks. Either way, the controversy has now moved far beyond a single press conference. Because the broader implications of this dispute could reshape the relationship between political leadership and the military establishment and raise difficult questions about how the commander-in-chief role should be exercised. And as this debate spreads across Washington, one critical question is beginning to dominate the conversation. What does this mean for the future of civilian, military relations in the United States? That's where the story becomes even more consequential.